Welcome to One Chapter, One Thought. I'm Pastor Chris from Lincroft Bible Church in New Jersey, and every weekday I read one chapter of the New Testament and offer one brief devotional thought. Today's reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 19. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and put a purple robe on him, and they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and to slap him in the face. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Jesus then came out wearing a crown of thorns and purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." Then the Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You do not speak to me? Do you know that I have the authority to release you, and I have the authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made effort to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out, sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of the preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, away with him, crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So they handed him over to be crucified. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the Place of the Skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with 2 men on each side, one on either side, and Jesus in between. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It was written, "Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews." Therefore many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and in Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, "Do not write, 'The King of the Jews,' but that he said, 'I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his outer garments and made 4 parts, a part for every soldier, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece. So they said to one another, "Let's not tear it, but cast lots for it to decide whose it shall be." This was to fulfill the scriptures. "They divided my outer garments among them. For my clothing they cast lots." Therefore the soldiers did these things. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus then saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour the disciple took her into his own household. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things had already been accomplished to fulfill the scripture, said, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of the sour wine upon a branch of hyssop and brought it to his mouth. Therefore, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Then the Jews, because it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they may be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and the other who was crucified with him. But coming to Jesus, when they saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you may also believe. For these things came to pass to fulfill the scripture, not a bone of him shall be broken. And again, another scripture says, "They shall look on him whom they pierced." After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen, wrapped it with spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had been laid. But therefore, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. One thought. The Gospels have often been called a passion narrative with an extended introduction. The word passion means crucifixion. And essentially what that quote from a German theologian was getting at was saying that the gospel is leading all up to this. Like chapter 19, John 19 is what the whole gospel is really about, Jesus's crucifixion. Jesus has been working towards and moving towards this chapter, the whole Gospel of John. If you've read through John, you remember that refrain, my hour has not come, my hour has not come, my hour has not come, that Jesus says. And then eventually he gets to the point where he says, my hour has come. It is now time for the Son of Man to be glorified. What Jesus is talking about was saying originally, the time of my crucifixion is not yet. I still have work to do for the mission of God. And then when he says my hour has come, now it's the right time. Now all the events are leading up to this. And it all gets to the point where Jesus had accomplished his work. He cried out, it is finished. It's finished. Everything that the Father had sent Jesus to do was now completed. So this is not a cry of defeat, but actually victory. And this is why we often call what Jesus did on the cross the finished work of Christ. Because he says it's finished, and the book of Hebrews reiterates that Jesus died once for all time. Jesus did not need to be crucified again and again and again. That's one act on Jesus' part was enough to secure our salvation for all time. And so when we contemplate Jesus' finished work, we find that we can rest from our self-reliance. We are not made right with God because of what we do. We don't need to just do a lot of good things and maybe God will accept us. And so we can actually rest easy, knowing that our position before God is secure, not because of our works, but because of what Christ did on the cross. And then we can live fearlessly and relentlessly for the Lord. Somewhat ironically, when you realize that Jesus paid it all to him you owe, as the old hymn says. So the work of Jesus on the cross then is the most powerful and liberating work in the world. And we can live for Christ because he gave his life for us.